wrote a book called Behold the Monster, about my interviews with a serial killer named Samuel over the course of several years during a federal investigation. And I interviewed him incarcerated because of this man here in part. And yeah, you did that gumshoe work at the end and really found the baby. We're driving around Florida, trying to find those
driving around everywhere in the South, it seemed like.
Trying to find those living, breathing witnesses that would somehow breathe some life into the case to get it indicted, right?
Yeah.
But let's take it back a few steps. So I'm so happy to have Rick here, and he appears in the book. And, you know, I'll just give you the spoiler of, you know, one of my favorite moments of when we were still doing, you know, work more on the ground before COVID, you know, I would go to South LA and start interviewing people in places where that might have matched up in certain ways with confessions of this serial killer who I was talking to. And Rick went with me one day, and so we parked next to what actually did turn out to be the Pink Motel. This thing we were looking for the Pink Motel where Sam had picked up his victim Alice. You know, because at every point I was trying to connect. And as Rick helped me sort of navigate police work and how to read an investigation report and pay attention to chronology and don't depend on DNA to do your thinking for you.
Especially on old cases,
yeah. Yeah. And so we got out of my mom Toyota, got in my Highlander there. And, you know, there was an encampment right where we pulled over, got out of the car, and someone was cooking up hot dogs, and they said, "Hey, are you guys in a movie?" Because we clearly didn't appear, you know, belong in that neighborhood at that moment.
And they had cameras behind us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there were cameras. Guys doing a movie? I don't think this one was with the camera. Oh, this one was.
Yeah,
oh, yeah. Well, then it was a much more logical assumption. Anyway, so like, hey, you guys making a movie? And Nick said, yeah, we're making a porno. I know I look like an old guy, but it's actually this long. I have it stuffed in my socks so I don't trip on it. And everyone, they fell out. And this woman was like, that's what I'm talking about. I want to star part 2. And in the most masterful transition I have ever seen, one of them certainly in my life, literary or otherwise, he said, speaking of long, how long have you lived in this neighborhood? And, you know, because we were trying to find people who knew who owned the building 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you know, so
it was no longer a motel. A lot had changed. It's obviously a little over 30 years. So, yeah.
But we found a Chinese restaurant where the people were able to confirm, you know, that it had been the same color, that it had been the same structure. And then in the wildest turn of events, you know, I was taking calls from the actual serial killer as we were driving around trying to find these crime scenes. So, shall we take it back?
You have a question? Well, I haven't read the book yet. So I'm trying to jump in and figure out what you're talking about. At this point in time, the man has committed a bunch of murders. He's in jail already. And now
let's do this thing.
And now you're
okay. Here we go.
So this
chronology.
Going to South LA on this interview, you've been communicating with the serial killer while he's in jail?
That is correct. So
okay,
the chronology is, and it is, you know, if anyone had told me this before I started, I don't know if I ever would have started. there are several different investigations. And the most important was the investigation in which, through a Department of Justice grant that was given to the LAPD from the cold case special section at the time, right?
Yeah.
Not homicide unit. And they were able to run, you probably explain this better than I, but DNA.
Right,
From
we
old
screened
evidence.
cases on overtime that was being paid for by federal money. So it cost taxpayers nothing, and we were able to go back, because that was our full-time job, and start screening cases that looked the most probative for DNA, sexual assaults, close contacts, fights, things like that, where maybe nails scratched, things like that. So we just submitted, and we went from 4 people doing DNA work for the whole city of Los Angeles at the onset. Eventually, we were getting so many successes, they hired 25 to do this stuff. So it was huge in that way. So they started running them, and then there eventually became 2 hits coming back to a guy named Samuel Little, because he had a record. So he was in the National Data Bank. And that was from sexual assault evidence, not so much in the victim, but on the victim, like on her clothing, things like that. And
With this particular
with
killer.
these particular killers.
And part of that was how you were also able to, that behavioral evidence, where the DNA was found.
Yeah,
not
because
just
usually it's
necessarily
from
the-
the sexual assault evidence,
Right.
from the swabs, vaginal swabs, sometimes fingernails, nipple swabs, anal swabs, whatever, oral swabs. He operated differently, and he would leave DNA on them from masturbating, basically.
I think we can tell.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
the nickname,
yeah.
they
Yeah.
called him the choke and stroke killer.
Oh.
That was
So anyway, so eventually we got a 3rd. So now we know we have a serial guy in the 1980s in Los Angeles. But then you start looking at his background, and he was a perfect. I mean, if it wouldn't be so expensive, it would be a great song to use for a movie. Is Killer on the Road, because or Riders in the Storm, because there's a killer on the road. His mind is squirming like a toad. I mean, that's Sam Little. He was in his car constantly on the move, east to west or west to east on the southern I-10, going up like Interstate 75 between Florida, Georgia, up to Ohio. And he was having contacts all over, but usually not getting enough evidence to hold him for any length of time. And not many murders were being put on him, but we knew he was good for murders all over the place. Anyway,
And
that's
how I stumbled into this was trying to not write about real stuff. I thought, I was going to be, I was fast on Connolly's heels. This is the Harry Bosch, and I was talking to Connolly. I believe I asked if I could poach you and ask you some questions. And get some procedural stuff and begin talking to Mitzi. I was talking about a totally different case. This case found me. I was going to write a novel. I had a whole idea. We were talking about, I remember, how you might be able to tell if somebody jumped or
And
was.
The Drop, from his book, The Drop.
Right, and you and I had that conversation too, and you were like, are you looking at this? Are you looking at this? And I started to see the whole world in a different way, which is also kind of what writing did for me at a younger time in my life.
Hey, Jillian,
And yes,
Why was he calling you when you were taking these calls?
well, I'll tell you.
We'll get to that, yeah.
I'm getting there right now. So as I'm interviewing Mitz and then ultimately Rick and thinking I'm going to write a mystery, this Sam Little case falls in my lap. And I begin to hear about the 2014 conviction and the nationwide manhunt that,
Mitzi was doing.
well, I mean, you were.
Yeah, I got put with Mitzi my last year. I was going to be retiring, and I was the senior person and the most experienced person. I've been working homicide for like 27 years at that time.
And your maps.
And my maps, because I know they have, the news still has that footage of me doing the maps and stuff, just looking at every contact where he'd had contact, even if it was for a ticket or we had a receipt or whatever it was, we were mapping him in dates and seeing his patterns, and that's where we're gonna start on a national thing.
Because he was a transient. And anyway, I decided to pursue this story. I put my novel on the shelf. I said, I'm going to go in and talk to this serial killer. I'm also going to talk to every cop I can find, every victim's family member, and I'm listening to these legendary LA cops who are telling me, we believe there were many more and we just weren't able to mobilize the effort or the resources. And I thought, well, as a journalist, like I don't solve murders. I don't have the capacity to solve murders. I do have capacity to bring attention to something. So I thought I could bring attention to this. Maybe, local jurisdictions will get excited. Maybe there'll be some communication, about behavioral patterns. And, and then I never really expected to fall in this far into a federal investigation because I wasn't the first person to have this idea to come back around to the story.
So what happened with the 3 LAPD cases, we had him, and then when he was convicted in all 3 of those, we were good to go as far as he's not going to get out.
At first you had to get him.
Yeah, we had to find him.
Because he was transient and there was no way he had no address, no Walmart card.
Louisville, Kentucky, using a debit card. I mean, Mitzi did a good job, my partner at the time on that.
Using your map as part of it.
Yeah, of course. I went like this. Where is San Luis?
Only because it's small here, I'll tell you all a secret.
You already told one true secret.
Now, when Mitz figured out that debit card, and they were able to say, he was at this liquor store. His SSI payments went directly to Alhambra 2 days in a row. She somehow was able to call and get the last transactions, but for some reason it cost $1. If it'll cost, you can find your last 5 transactions, but it'll cost you $1. So she called once, cost $1. Called again just to check. And she's like, I'm just gonna call again just to fuck with him. Just so he's like, where are these dollars coming out of? And then the U.S. Marshals went and just
They're good. U.S.
swooped
Marshals
down
are
on him.
amazing what they can do in locating people.
So he didn't
And there were a couple of really passionate ones. And something you told me that I always remember was I can't remember the name of the guy who was in Louisville, but I know he was like, I lost him in this city, just give me another chance.
Actually,
And you always said,
I think he was in somewhere in Louisiana.
right.
Just a small county, but he was passionate about
Hungry.
trying to help Mitzi find this.
And Rick told me, when you call a police station, find the newest person.
Hungry.
Talk to the newest detective there. And you might just find somebody who'll go out of their way.
So when we got those 3, and my main job working with Mitzi was to travel, which, could be fun. I like traveling anyway, but we were trying to get other people interested. It wasn't so much we weren't interested in finding other LAPD cases. That would come with time. But we were trying to get Pascagoula, Mississippi interested. We were trying to get anybody in Florida because we knew he had tons of cases. One of them that he found, they kicked it loose. They kicked them because they didn't feel like they had the evidence. And it's understandable what the kind of people that he picked on, because there's a lot of that. Their backgrounds weren't nice and clean, where you get a lot of answers. They were,
Was he already a suspect in other cases, but they just didn't have enough?
Some he was, we found out, and some eventually were complete whodunits until they did the work. But not everybody is interested. Not everybody has a cold case unit. They don't have the money, and people can get away with and say, well, our agency doesn't have a cold case unit, but we have our detectives when they have time work other cold cases. And basic story is they're not funded as well, and they don't have time. They might start in something for a few days and they get a new case, and it never works out. So that's why, it's nice to have a cold case unit, even if it's one person funding it. But we went around and tried to get people interested. That was our job.
And originally, because so much of why you had to do that, like why you had to revisit these cases from a cold case perspective, why they weren't addressed in the first place. Some of it was the attitude of law enforcement, in certain parts of the country toward, like who's worth an investigation, the pretty blonde co-ed who goes missing on spring break, or a black prostitute addicted in Mississippi in 1987.
Where there's no pressure from the families.
And a history of.
Yeah.
And no flashing media. And in many times, anyone who could have reported it would also have been then, implicated in criminal activity. Or for instance, there were transgender victims in Florida. It was a crime to be transgender. So were you going to walk down to the police station and say, my friend's gone missing. Her name is Marianne. I don't know what her name was.
Yeah, it's
Originally,
an array of stuff.
Yeah, the victims got misgendered. So, even if they were reported, people are looking in the wrong place. I think that the effort in 2014, when the DNA hits came through, if it were easy enough to just say, okay, there were these 3 DNA hits, the MOs are identical, the law enforcement in that area at that time, there were women turning up in dumpsters every day.
And eventually, years later, if they looked at these cases and they had some kind of a connection, we also had supplemental corroboration data like receipts, and we could see where he was moving. Even if there's no receipt from that town, we knew that on this date he was most likely passing through or stopped for lunch or whatever, because we had a gas receipt or a ticket or something that we had done through these offline searches, what they call offline searches through the FBI.
And I remember you telling me that, even with all that, Beth Silverman, the DDA who has prosecuted Chester Turner, Michael Hughes, a lot of serial cases, was like, I've never seen a rap sheet like this. Here are 3 DNA hits. Like, I want to indict. I can't indict on this. These are 3 prostitutes with 3 DNA hits. There's, it's not a strong enough case.
The problem with prostitutes and DNA is, okay, was he the customer before? No. And the second guy.
It's his argument.
The second guy didn't kill her. He just killed her. I mean, he didn't have sexual relations with her. He just killed her. And so.
I was unlucky. I just happened to be there.
When you have case after case after case after case where his DNA's on it, and either he's the suspect or he's the unluckiest son of a bitch in the world, because everybody he has consensual sex with as a prostitute relationship happens to get killed by the next guy that,
Right.
So at some point, you realize, okay, this is the guy.
So once you had him in custody and you were going across the country, in some ways you were looking for living, breathing people. I mean, I know that's how Beth puts it. She says, Beth Silverman, the district attorney, says, bring me living, breathing witnesses, because there's going to be a living, breathing man right there. And it's much easier for jury to identify with that.
They wanted to hear
than with somebody invisible.
From somebody that survived him. And so there comes these 2 amazing ladies, Hilda, who came off like a church woman, but years before had been in a down and out area of Pascagoula, Mississippi.
Carver Village.
As a prostitute. And
Pascagoula.
Pascagoula.
That was the first question Hilda asked me. I think I got the only interview with her. I mean, you know, from the civilians. Do you know how to spell Pascagoula yet?
Oh,
And I was just
And
like,
her
P-S-C-H-O-U-L-A, yo!
her counterpart, now Hilda was, when we met her, you know, she was 55 to 60, very
Tall,
stately,
regal.
attractive, talked like somebody that you meet in church. Really a sweet lady, really sweet. And then her counterpart, that they were friends, she told me, it doesn't matter if you don't call me by my name, you call me by my nickname. Everybody does. Just call me Bowlegs. And that's what she said.
Layla McClain,
Yeah.
Bowlegs.
And she was a character. I mean, we went and interviewed her. And I have to say, Pascagoula, Mississippi, when we went there, the current detective had brought in all the old retired guys that had worked on these cases because they knew he was good. They tried to prosecute him, the grand jury wouldn't indict him back then in 1980, whatever, 2 or 3 or whatever.
So, you know, every time everyone wants to put everything on the cops, it was the grand jury that didn't indict him. It was us. Yeah.
But,
Anyway, go on.
but when
Just
Bowlegs came in, she remembered hearing her interview, she says, he knocked me so hard, I didn't know where I was to get him first. A lot of times he was a former boxer. And she goes, and I don't know how many doors he had in his car, but I was in and out of every one of those.
I think he said, I know there were 4. She said, I know there were 4 because I was in and out of every one of them.
Yeah, he hit me and tried, and then I was fighting him. She's about 5 foot.
5'2".
Yeah, she was a tiny little thing.
Tiny.
And she would get away and get out and pull her back in, and she got the rear tailgate. I mean, it was a terrifying story, but it was just funny the way she told it, and she had this wonderful sense of humor. But we brought them out in our case, and the jury were wild about that. And
I actually include almost her entire testimony in a chapter in this book, and I don't do that with any other testimony, but I just felt like hers needed to be alone, like it needed to be in her voice.
she was a rock star.
Yeah, she was. You
They're
know.
both unfortunately
Yeah.
passed now.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about that is these old retired detectives that were waiting for us, you know, they knew we were from LAPD. They had no idea about our backgrounds, you know, from LAPD, which, believe it or not, no matter how many people don't like LAPD, when you go to other states, because they still kind of think of Dragnet and Adam 12 and all those old shows, that they want to hold your badge and they want to photograph with you with the badge and stuff. But when we walked in the room, this one guy who's since passed, but I got him a book signed, said, how's Harry Bosch doing? Not knowing, and I don't know who here knows that, but my background, I've worked with Michael Conley on his books and podcasts and things for 20 years now. He's one of my best friends. So of course, when he asked that, that's how I got him the book signed and we sent it to him and stuff. So he was thrilled. He was thrilled. But yeah, they were great. And they were from the Deep South, and they came up at a time that the Deep South was even more different than it is now, more prolific.
I have a couple of questions.
Who survived?
No, there were some others, but
So they just got away.
yeah,
Oh,
there were some other ones around the country. In San Diego,
There's
was
one
amazing.
left and who, you know, I mean, she was left for dead. It was accidental. There was only Layla fought her way out. Out of 93, one. Ran across, not only ran, fought him, ran across 4 lanes of traffic while a shipyard was getting out. Wound up tripping over somebody who was peeing in the bushes behind the clubs, who grabbed her and pulled her into the middle of the street. They took her to the hospital, and just very quickly, I know a lot of, we could tell a ton of funny stories about Layla. But, you know, this is not one of them, that she was taken to the hospital. You know, she didn't report the crime, was, you know, asked in the testimony, it's right here in the book, she reported no. And Beth Silverman said, let me ask you this another way. Did anyone ask you what happened to you? She showed up at the hospital beaten half to death, half naked, with her eyes, petechial hemorrhage, which is when the blood vessels break in your eyes from being strangled, and bruises around her neck. Did any doctor ask you what happened to you? And she said, no, ma'am. She said, didn't nobody care what happened to a black prostitute in Mississippi in 1987? And, and it was just and so when they were able to come and I think testify, you would think it'd be cathartic for them, but they were mad
They
too.
were pissed.
They were pissed. They were like, oh, right now we get to say this? Now you care? Yeah. I think Layla had a fit when they took her to a hotel that wasn't very nice, right?
I don't know, because I was already retired by then.
Oh, they
Otherwise,
picked
I
him
would've
up.
put
Oh, well,
him in a
first of all, they
Ford
picked him up at the airport in a black and white.
Nice.
And she was like, absolutely not. You are out of your mind if you think I'm stepping into that car.
Especially in the backseat, right?
Yeah. And, and Mitzi had Tim on the phone. Tim Marshall was another partner of Rick's. He worked Cold Feet Special Section. He'd go on forever and ever. But at the beginning, I just know that you couldn't open a door there and like also have your seat out at the same time, or like what was it? You couldn't reach the telephone without closing the door. You had like 100 square feet, and now it's a nationwide phenomenon. And I'm gonna say that that's like a change in law enforcement attitudes and a change in science, and maybe, hopefully, a change in our society and what we value and who we value.
It's like Harry Bosch's, like Conley came up and everybody counts or nobody counts.
Everyone counts or
Everyone
no
counts,
one
none
counts.
counts. Yeah.
I didn't even know if that was you or him or both of you. I think it's
I mean, he wrote it, but I don't know if I've ever said something.
you probably, I bet you said it.
I don't
And he just
remember.
wrote it down.
Yeah.
But what made you want to work with writers? Because cops and writers, or cops and reporters, right? I mean, I think Connolly says you never said anything to him, but no comment
Yeah.
until you retired.
Well, I didn't know him, and when he, the days he first started calling me, I was not as experienced as I would later become, and so you don't want to put out something that you shouldn't be putting out. I hadn't learned all the ways to be tricky and all that kind of stuff. This information just for us to know things that only the killer would know. And so I shied away from it, and then eventually the experience, and then there were always people. There were several journalists I really, really liked and trusted, and they trusted me. And we would help each other, and that's the way it worked. And so you give them an exclusive or give them a heads up, hey, start writing on this so you'll have it when the press release comes out tomorrow. There's people you can work with like that. The guy named Andrew Blankstein from the LA Times was like the best. I loved him. And but writing, I always loved books. I worked with James Elroy a lot, for that 10-year period of my life. I probably saw more of him than anybody. He's a crazy man.
And he's obsessed with the same LA history of crime that you are.
Yeah. And so then Conley's situation came along, and it was pretty nice. And he's such an amazing person. And so he got involved. We did a podcast with the three women who stopped Sam Little, Mitzi Roberts, my partner, Beth Silverman, the DA, and Jillian, who was solving cases on her own, independently. And that's why police were talking with her. And it helped from an introduction of me or Mitzi, saying, hey, she's working with and give enough information. And she's going to solve cases for you, believe me, because she's getting them right for the killer, right from the killer. And she probably can set up an interview at this point for you to go in and talk to him because of her relationship with him. Not that they were buddy, but she had a respectful working relationship with who became the most prolific serial killer in American history, which
made me hard to get out of the way.
Yeah.
For the FBI and the Department of Justice.
Can you tell us more about that? Like your first meeting with him? Like, how did that happen?
Well, and how many murders did you think he had done when you first met him versus 93?
Well, what did you think?
I thought, when I first heard about him and his age and the amount of time he had spent in custody during his formative years, I thought it was I would say it was gonna be several dozen, you know. I mean, you never think 93, you know, but I did think, you know, this guy's good for 20, could be 30, because he was constantly on the move and constantly doing the same thing, and getting away with it, or somebody escaped, whatever, and the cases weren't sticking with him. And so he had a lot of time out and so I think we figured out, I think the first murder that we know of was 70 to 2005. 35-year period.
Right, yeah, 71 to 2005, he was killing, and then, you know, for all the decades before and after, he was, you know, being arrested every day for petty theft, assault on a police officer. I mean, you know, he said, I had them all. You know, they all thought that they were arresting a shoplifter. I'd go steal steaks at a Walmart, and by night I was out, and I was killing women.
So 2005 to 14, we got arrested, no murders.
No,
Not that we, and there are people you get, I mean, there are people, most people who do stop at certain ages, for a variety of reasons.
various reasons.
He wasn't gonna stop until he felt like he needed to stop, because he had no, it wasn't like he was shocked that when he did in life, and thought, like, I can't do that anymore. He just. And
I think he was tired.
And he lived those past, I mean, he
diabetic
lived
and-
those, I mean, that's why
Yeah.
he's able. Do you also, anybody here know about the paintings?
Yes.
Okay, you should talk about the paintings. Because that's
So,
what, this is the kind of stuff,
Through the ladies.
this is the kind of stuff that gets the media really interested, because not only do you have 93 murders, which should shock anybody, but now you have another aspect that's really unique for anybody, especially a serial killer to have. But
yeah, I mean, you know, Sam, it's very easy to think, but you know, I mean, part of the reason I call the book Behold the Monster, you know, so easy to think these, you know, these monsters, these serial killers, these people who do these unconscionable things. Could you possibly go out and murder 93 people? No, I would guess probably the answer to that would be no for most people in this room. At least I hope so. But I thought maybe a dozen. I thought maybe 2 dozen. I thought, you know, I looked and then I started to think, except those 3 hits were so close together.
Yeah.
So what would the chances have been that he'd have started that late? They'd have been that close. You know, they're like, there are patterns. There are patterns you can follow in these sexually motivated serial killers, and they're not by any means road maps. Speaking of maps, you know, I think I say in the book, you know, like when I was looking at the maps and trying to follow follow the chronology, and I also get, you know, I get victims who reach out to me and say, I'm sure this is the man who assaulted me. And I'm a lot of times able to look at the rap sheet and say, yeah, no, but they're not right.
no, but he looked, I mean, they
Right.
remember his eyes, the one that survived remembered his eyes.
Yeah. But I'm able to look at the map and say, I'm sorry, you know, he was incarcerated across the country on that day. And you know, like I know you want this answer. This just isn't the one.
It's got a good map in the book too, its locations, you can just look at the
Yeah.
map and see.
And sort of, I feel like it's a sense without necessarily having to be in every single detail or go through every single
Case.
bit of research or case that I went through. I mean, I haven't even been through all 93 or seen all of the confessions. They said, have you seen all the confessions? You know, first of all, I can only see the confessions of cases that are cleared or closed,
Right.
you know, and then
If
I
they
have
want to share.
and it's still didn't pain in the ass.
Our cold cases are only cases that are closed, not including cold cases?
Well, a cold case is an open case.
Got it.
Solved after whatever.
Not unsolved.
After
Right.
a certain number of years that the agency determines this is a cold case. So then every agency, maybe 5 years, 3 years, whatever.
So they had to share that with you.
Well, they would with us
I see.
normally. Generally, you're not unsolved cases with a civilian. But then she's now coming to them with information.
So once in a
So-
while, exactly like you were saying, you know, with certain detectives, I established a rapport. You know, it had been going on over several years. I also sat on a huge breaking story, you know, for months and months and months because it was a federal investigation and I didn't want to blow it for them, you know, and they offered me the exclusives and the interviews. And by the way, if the FBI ever offers you an exclusive, they don't give exclusives. That's just a word to the wise.
You didn't mention art.
Art. So Sam, you know, like a study in some way in compartmentalization, right? Like dissociative. I mean, is there such a thing as, I'm talking to my friend Claire here. Claire Bidwell-Smith, ladies and gentlemen. If any of you are sad, talk to her.
Best intro I've ever had.
She's a great therapist and also a remarkable diagnostician, and talks me through the Sasha chapter in the book. I don't know if you saw it yet. But
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely coffee last night.
I won't give any spoilers, but there was definitely a late night call to Claire
So
in the middle of
Sam,
this book.
go-
And
get to the art.
Sam-
That's interesting.
Would draw his victims.
Later.
Later, as he was confessing, you know, but he would also, he had years and years of drawing. He'd been drawing, he started learning when he was 20 in the Ohio State Reformatory and
That's his first time.
in Lancaster, Ohio. Yes, that was when he learned, and he traded. No, he was 13 at the Boys Industrial School, which was a famously abusive reform school. You know, and you know, head trauma, sexual trauma, anything you want, throw it all in there. As Sam's niece said, you know, like break you mentally, physically, kick your teeth in, anything. And they actually did used to like knock the boys' head, you know, make them stand there and just knock their heads into the wall. And that doesn't help anyone who's set up to be a serial killer. Doesn't help to get hit in the head a whole lot.
Was it a romantic thing that he was drawing his victims?
I think it was like a trophy thing, more than a romantic thing. Like he had
He
an
remembered them
ownership.
so well.
Yeah.
It was like, that's why he could draw them 30 years
Yeah.
later. With an uncanny resemblance to a lot of the live photos. And that's when he started doing the Jillian and then
Weird
went to
use
the
of
police.
photos.
She has 70 of his drawings.
Do you think that means it was also traumatic for him to commit these acts? Because, I mean, we often have zero memory that preserves.
I mean, any more than sex is traumatic for any of us? No. I imagine once in a while. No, but that's a terrible joke. But seriously, truly, I mean, you get in the habit of terrible jokes, right?
You do.
Are these
But
pictures
really,
that he drew?
what?
Yeah.
Yes,
Pictures
those
he
are the victim pictures that he drew. These
They
are.
were 10, 20 years later.
Mhm.
30 years.
What was your
yes.
What was your rapport with him like? Did you find yourself feeling friendly with him, or was it always like did you keep a distance because he started to confide in you? Did you have to kind
Oh,
of
I asked him to
pretend
turn
be
it back
friendly
on. I was getting really
with
hot.
him?
Sorry.
You know, actually, I gotta quote you on another piece of great advice on this. I remember when I was talking to Sam every day. At the end of the day, I couldn't get anything out of my head, and Claire just said, you know, at the end of the day, like I unplug with love. I unplug, my clients speak with love. I unplug my work with love. I unplug my sorrow with love, and that's what I started to do. And it was very helpful. But, no, every day I wasn't sitting there faking it, thinking I was looking into the eyes of evil. I mean, that's not how our relationship works. And also, he was far smarter than that. You don't go in there. If you go in there trying to play a game,
He's reading
you're gonna
you.
lose.
He's reading you just like you're reading him. And that's how I look at interviews with suspects all the time.
So how do you approach it?
When I approach it, I've told younger detectives all the time, unless you have a really good strategy of how you want to do it that works for you, you go in and interview people using your natural personality. And I'm pretty low key, and I never was one of those that, hey, listen, you better tell me this, because otherwise, we're gonna try to get more years for you or something. I just go and say, hey, I'm here to talk to you, tell your side of the story. If you want to tell it to me, your name has come up in an investigation. I want to hear if it's solid or not. If you know something, let me know now. If there's mitigating or circumstances, let me know now, because later people aren't going to believe you when you go to court, and now you have an excuse when you had a chance to tell it. But I have to read your rights because you're in custody. So I'm obligated to do that. So let me do it, and then we can talk if you want it. I just
You
felt
totally
like
talk, wouldn't you?
most
I
people,
would. I was like ready. I'm like, what do you want to know? I'm all in.
most people would waive their rights, and you're not tricking them. You can't mess with rights. You can lie to suspects all the time. You can say, we have your DNA if they don't. We have your fingerprint if you don't. That's all legal, and it's been, even with the very liberal courts in some areas, they've always upheld that, because they're going to be lying to you. It's not an even ground. So you can lie to them, because the theory is the normal person is not going to confess to something. Like if you say, we have your fingerprints, and you really weren't at this place, you're going to know. I'm not going to cop out just because you're telling me it, because I know I wasn't there. So you can do that.
Not entirely true, though.
What is?
Like, not entirely supportive of that. I mean, you can sometimes minors and people with really low IQs, you can kind of convince them it's just in
but I'm
their
talking
best
about,
interest.
that's what I said, it's
Yeah.
in the normal. That's what you
Normal,
can do.
yeah.
And you're dealing a lot of times with bad suspects. Are we done?
Oh, I was just gonna say, we probably have time for like one more
Oh,
question.
Q&A
and
Anyway, so that's the point. They're reading you just like you're reading them. So,
So you have a real rapport with them.
yeah, and I
Yeah,
usually
it's
shine
true.
it. But go ahead.
And I also want Rick to just speak to something real quickly before we end, but yes, Casey?
So I've noticed that this theme keeps arising, and I'm wondering if you could expand on it a little bit about the role of bringing awareness and light to the experiences of, for example, trans, GLBTQIA+, people of color, indigenous people, in terms of law enforcement, and from your perspective, like how did that inform this whole process? Because I've heard you bring it up a couple of times. I'm wondering if you can expand on what your experience of that was. Does that make sense?
And first of all, I'm out of this conversation if they add one more initial to that, because I can't. I absolutely can't anymore. I'm just not even trying. But I have actually had to work on, because you start to understand how people edit you. I've had to work on including Sam's transgender victims, and I don't know them, and I don't know how they would have identified, or at those times, or what it would have been called, or how felt exactly. But I do know that Sam said himself, I don't care what's between your legs. Like his thing was next. He didn't care. And so, I think there are probably far more trans victims than we know. And like I said, I was trying to figure out how to, call the cops. Like, we don't know. I started calling, gay and lesbian community centers, or calling my friends and saying, did you know anyone who was like working as a stripper, transgender stripper, in Miami in 1975. Like they might know somebody who I could talk to, but it ain't gonna be the cops. So, I started to look at, criminal justice and how we can all participate in it, how we all sort of conceive of ourselves and our identity and once again our worth, and can start participating in this conversation. It took me a while to figure out how to twist the sentences around so that transgender actually made it in. They didn't just cut it out.
In the middle.
It's very just really easy sentence to cut off at the end. You say the violence, dismissal of violence against women and the transgender community, and all of a sudden it's just the dismissal of violence against women, which is not a just at all, but it's just a matter of sort of slowly, piece by piece, inviting people in to awareness. And that's what I hope I do with the book. I mean, I really go to some very deep, audacious places. I had sensitivity readings. They were like, we won't be needing you to have a sensitivity reading for this. I was like, what is that? And it was actually, are you being sensitive to the transgender community? And I was like, okay, fine, here, let me, and I actually wound up having some wonderful conversations with friends where they said, I think that this is, an incredible portrayal of this fractured identity.
So
And for me it was like, oh, right, that fractured identity. Like, I don't know that I was ever writing about that victim particularly. I didn't know her to begin with, or if I was writing about what I saw in me and her, and the journey that she took me on to fight for her. And the journey that Rick really never let up on me. And I appreciate it so much, and I will never forget the phone call in my life when you called me and you said, you're sitting down. Long Beach has that case. It's still open. It matches all your details, and the name is Alice Denise Duval, and I had known the name was Alice. It was one of the only. And I was like, what?
That was
What?
her first solve.
And I was just like, oh, I know it's not like a real thing. So I didn't do that thing. And you were like, no, you did. Wow. You pretty much did. He was like, you solved a murder, kiddo.
Wow.
So it's a very proud moment that I got you solved a murder, kiddo, out of Detective Rick Jackson.
I haven't told too many people that. You solved a murder, kiddo.
I
think
well, I don't
the
think
ones
Tim
that
would take to that
No.
very well. And Mitzi just like sock ya.
I'm afraid of Mitzi.
I'm afraid of everyone's afraid of
No,
Mitzi.
she's wonderful.
And she is wonderful.
I think they want you to start signing.
Yes, all right.
And mine.
Let's sign. Bye. Ask more questions. Stick around and talk to me. Drink, eat. Thank you so much for coming.